There's been a lot of controversy around the Olympic opening ceremonies. A lot of people upset with one particular scene where Dionysus, the Greek god of orgy, of merrymaking, a blue man like that, was presented in a scene, and the whole thing looked like the Last Supper. So just a few thoughts about that. It might actually be good for you to read something on Google about Dionysus, not be confused with Dionysius, who was one of the first bishops of Athens. In fact, the early Greek Christians took that name kind of to reconfigure it in a way of honoring God, as opposed to this sort of god of paganism. And so it's interesting that this whole controversy took place in Paris because Dionysus, the god of the Greek god of of orgies and merrymaking and so on, was presumably the father of Sequana, who is the goddess of the Seine River, la rivière la Seine, which is the one in the center of Paris around Notre Dame Cathedral. And so you've got the goddess of Sequana, who's the goddess of the river, and you've got Our Lady, Mother of God's Cathedral above on the island of Paris there. And so it's kind of like a central focus of a sort of a battle, really, you know. And interesting that during the Olympics there are 15 million people expected coming through Paris for the month of that event, whereas Notre Dame Cathedral gets 20 million people every year, year after year after year for decades. So the power of Our Lady is much stronger. So who's Dionysus, this man in blue that was seen at the Olympics? Again, you can read about it, but he's essentially from the 7th century BC Greek god of that the Romans referred to as Bacchus, god of orgy, wine making, liberal sexuality, food, fun, but pleasure without any kind of boundaries or virtue or limits, you know. And so the parties of Dionysus would involve drinking a lot, so that whatever merrymaking takes place after there is simply a reflection of the drinking and so on. So ritual, kind of ritual madness, theater, ecstatic dancing, no restraints is really what it is. Dionysus was sort of a binary sexual being who would sleep as easily with men as with women. And so in the little town of Dionysus in Greek, there'd be parades every year in the ancient world. Parades of children, of wine, of bread, large pieces of bread, and even phalluses were carried along, that sort of thing. Sounds strangely familiar with what we see in our own culture, and kind of a reawakening of this stuff, you know. And he had in his hands a kind of a weapon. It's kind of like a stick called a thyrsus, you know, to fend off those who disagree with his way of doing things, you know. And he was considered sort of a god of love, but not love according to the Greek word that Christians use. The word love for Christians is agape, service of other people, you know, service of the poor, service of those who are without houses, and so on. It was really the god of eros, the god of the Greek understanding of love was, in the case of Dionysus, was really the love of eros, right? And so why would the leaders of the Paris Olympic opening ceremonies choose this theme? Well, for many reasons, you know. I think they want to present Paris as a land of winemaking and food, and of course it's well known for that, but also merrymaking. Paris in France has traditionally been seen as a kind of a place where you have a good time with no boundaries, a kind of a place of unbridled living. It's got that kind of history, and so they try to capture that, you know, a kind of a cult with no rules, those who see no rules. And with the growing movement of wokeism and sort of a culture of sexual pleasure being sort of at the center of our contemporary culture, this was a good image to present. With this blue man who represents everything that we, our growing culture right now, of wokeism is keen on. So was an attempt to try to represent the Last Supper? Maybe. It was probably well seen by those who were the directors, artistic directors. They probably recognized it. Christians would recognize that. But they certainly did not, I don't think that they deliberately attempted to try to insult Christians, but they, in their own little kind of wink method, said, yeah, the Christians will see something like this. So it's it kind of shows that the struggle for virtue, the struggle between the debasement of the human person and the nobility of the human person is really a battle that takes place within the conscience, and it became very apparent at these opening ceremonies in this particular situation, and kind of our culture right now. Kind of something debasing, calling us to more animalistic behavior and degrading behavior, and something of God calling us to the more noble behavior of human beings. That's really at the heart of our cultural battle right now. And the Paris opening ceremony at that moment kind of showed that really clearly. It was kind of fun to see that, you know. So was the Last Supper mocked? I don't really know if that was deliberately intended, but certainly they recognized it. But mockery is always a sign of respect towards those things that we honor and respect. So in a kind of a funny way, the mockery is a proof that the message and the presence of Christ is recognized. As we know, many more people will be seeing Notre Dame Basilica Cathedral in Paris than will have seen the Olympics and seen this particular scene. As I mentioned, that there are 20 million people going to the cathedral and look at the beauty of it. Their spirits are raised up, and so we recognize the greatness of God. So my particular upset, well, it's unpleasant for sure, but these little things don't have the great effect in the long term. Human beings see and are attracted by what is beautiful and what is good, and I think in the long term, degradation never really wins, you know. But it kind of is an interesting reality, because it kind of expresses the heart of the battle of our culture today, you know, between the constant calling away when God is no longer there. Then there are no limits to what I can do in terms of pleasure, and I must seek it all because that's what it's all about. Whereas when I say I believe and I love God, then there's a constant call to greater nobility and greater goodness, you know. And so the second reading of this Sunday really fits well with that. We're called away from a world of paganism, i.e. where there is no God, to whom I refer, and called to humble obedience to God, who calls me to love, but in a way of service of others. So I pray that the Olympics will go well. I just love watching those athletes and the hard work they've done, and I won't allow this particular event to kind of dampen my enthusiasm about these great people who are doing their wonderful work as athletes and have worked so hard for it. And may, in the midst of it, there be a constant call of all people to a greater love for the Lord and respect for Him. Have a great week. Bye-bye.